I'm Mark Dawson from the Self-Publishing Show, and this is Self-Publishing Spotlight, where we shine a light on the indie authors who are changing the world of publishing, one book at a time.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Spotlight. We meet indie authors at all stages of their careers and ask them a series of 5 questions. 5 questions about their process, their mistakes and their successes. 5 answers that will help you level up your own author career. My name's Tom Ashford and I'm part of the Self-Publishing Formula. Don't forget that you can get your self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. This week's guest is Stephen Marriott. He's written 2 books in the literary fiction genre and he lives in the UK. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Tom. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on. Now, obviously, I know a little bit about the background of your books, so we're going to dive straight into the first question here is, why do you write?
Why do I write? Well, that's a good question, and I guess it's one of those things where it took me a while to realise that I had something to say, but I now, as soon as I discovered I had something to say, I guess you could say I sort of feel this sort of obligation to be true to my inner voice in a sense, and verbalise it in kind of a written form. And as I say, I always felt that I had this inner voice, but I didn't really discover that inner voice until when I quit my corporate job in the investment world, stockbroking, around 5 years ago. And I guess there was a sort of nagging sort of anxiety in me that I want to do something different. I want to be creative, but I didn't quite know how. And eventually, I went through a few life changes and quit this job in stockbroking, and did what a lot of people tend to do after working for a long time in a career. I went traveling, and how do I put it? Those travels were great. It took me to South America, took me to Asia. But when I came back from those travels to London, I'd been blogging and enjoying the sort of, blogging aspect of writing, but I still didn't really sort of have a clear vision of what I really wanted to do. But what I did know is I didn't want to get back to working permanently full-time in financial services. Yeah. And then somehow I heard about this walk, which I'd been told about 10 years ago, but forgotten about it, called the Camino de Santiago. And I'm sure some people have heard of this pilgrimage across northern Spain, which starts in a little Basque village on the French side of the Pyrenees, and then basically about 4 or 5 weeks later, depending on how fast you walk, you arrive in Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, Galicia. And I went on this walk, and kind of as I've been doing on my previous travels, I sort of had a journal. I was just taking notes and just writing about my experience. And it was just a very simple walk. No more simpler than just literally walking about 25 kilometers a day, talking to people, hearing about their lives, eating, having a bit of merriment and drinks at the end of the day in the pilgrim hostels, and then repeating the same exercise the next day, the walk. But slowly but surely, that simplicity of walking and being in nature just, I think, just took me back to sort of grassroots, sort of some of the things I'm interested in. And a lot of the sort of the noise, etc., that was in my mind began to clear. It's a bit like meditation in a way, walking like that so regularly. Yeah. And so 800 kilometers later, when I arrived in Santiago, I started to blog about the experience. I wanted to share it with people. And to cut a long story short, my travel blog experience seemed to morph into a story about a young flamenco guitarist looking to find his way in life. And he's forced to busk and walk the Camino de Santiago. And during that walk, he starts to sort of build faith and belief in his ability to play the flamenco guitar. And so the story, or the series as it's become known as, the Reluctant Pilgrim series, follows his journey of trying to realise his ambition of being a professional flamenco guitarist. So the first book takes place on the Camino de Santiago. The second book rejoins him just towards the end of that journey. Then that's when the journey really starts, because he goes to Madrid and really tries to find his place within the flamenco circuit, but doesn't quite sort of work. But this is a long way of answering your sort of question of why do I write. But I think there was a sort of a creative voice in there. But it wasn't until I gave my time myself the space to let that sort of inner voice come out that I realised that yes, I've got things to say, and I want to share them in story form.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely a more, I'd say, epic and inspired reason for becoming a writer and writing a book than most people get, which is, it's quite reasonable. A lot of people sit down and just sort of go, oh, I'd like to write a book and I've got a story in mind. But be inspired by an actual sort of, quite epic life event, walking. I've never walked, anywhere near that. I probably haven't walked that much in my life, let alone in one session.
You live in London, you probably walk a lot longer on a daily basis than you realise.
Yeah. But certainly I have not ever done an 800 kilometre, was it kilometre or mile?
800 kilometres. Well, it's actually, you finish in Santiago, but you have the option, if you wish, to continue to a place called Finisterre, which is as far as you can go before you get to the sea in that region of northwest Spain. So sort of all in all, it's about 1,000-kilometre walk. But it's interesting you say sort of that's sort of inspired, but don't get me wrong, Tom. Obviously, I've always loved books. I've read from a very early age, and was reading sort of the Tolkiens and things like that as a 12-year-old. But I think I've always sort of liked those kind of stories where there's a kind of a quest, sort of like small hobbits on a quest trying to sort of cross dangerous lands and having these challenges. And then as a kid I read the Narnia books, and I liked thrillers, so read pretty widely. But I think it was the books with a quest, with a sort of a journey aspect, often coming of age or on a journey of discovery that I've always loved.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic. You wrote that book, and it's now part of a series, is it not?
That's right. So the first book is called Candyfloss Guitar. And you know what? I wrote this. It was quite a while ago now, in terms of, I guess, the sort of the journey of indie publishing. I wrote this book about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, didn't know much about like a lot of people, Amazon, KDP, etc. But just wrote this book for myself. It was just the first one's just a novella. I sent it off to a couple of publishers. One I didn't hear from. One came back to me and said, "Oh, we like your style of writing, but can you write a crime thriller?" And that's great, because obviously that was one of their genres they worked with. But I didn't have a crime story. But I just kind of, someone said to me about Amazon, and so then I decided to get professionally edited, proofread, the normal sort of professional things you need to do. Put it on Amazon, and I think not long after that I discovered SPF, and some of the ways to sort of market your book. This isn't a genre which is sci-fi, historical fiction, so it's a bit more difficult to market. But I started building a mailing list, getting some followers, and I did start to get reviews. And to my surprise, they were all nice reviews. I think the worst I've had so far is a 3-star. Averaging sort of nearly 5 stars across the board, and so that's what encouraged me to write a second book, because maybe about a third of the reviews were saying, I thought I completed this little novella, but people wanted to know more about the character and what happens next. And so at the start of this year, the second book came out. It was a full-size novel. Again, I'm not prolific. It took me, with the research and writing, about 2 years to get it out. And see, for me, the research actually involved walking another Camino, because there's different ways to get to Santiago, because people start in different parts of Europe. And so I walked one in Andalusia, which would have been natural for my flamenco guitarist to go down to Andalusia to try and on his journey of becoming a flamenco guitarist. So and now there's a third book, and I've just come back literally yesterday from Portugal, where there's a Camino which that runs up the spine of Portugal, or the Camino Portuguese, which takes you up to Santiago again. And my character, after many years of making it as a guitarist finds himself a little bit lost and finds himself on the road again on a sort of seeking some answers about himself. So I've just walked for another week, which is about 120 kilometers, just to get a feel. And the thing is, when you go on these walks, you meet other pilgrims, as we call ourselves, and because the camaraderie of it, and you all have the same purpose to get to Santiago. It's not long before you open up about your life and your stories, and the different people that you intersect very much have inspired me with the stories and the sort of ideas which go into the book.
Awesome, that sounds fantastic. So question number 2 is, how do you write? So are you the sort of person who plots out your story once you've got back from one of these walks, or do you sort of just start with an idea and see where it takes you?
Well, I love this term. People are saying pantsing it when it comes to writing, and I have been in that category so far for the first 2 books. I kind of know where the story will end up, but I just don't know how it's going to get there. And so really, with the last book, I knew where I wanted to take my character, but I kind of just started writing. Of course, I've got my background notes and ideas and the ideas that have come with that journey. But no, I've written it, and I've been happy to let the story evolve. Of course, what that has meant is it slows the process down in many ways, because I have a story on paper and it's very sort of, I guess, inspired, and it's kind of raw, and it's come through me. At the same time, I think it probably needs it needs a lot more editing than maybe the average kind of book. And so I've then sort of gone back quite a bit, backwards and forwards with my editor and other people who I've brought into my team as proofreaders. Having said that, now I think for the 3rd book, I will probably plot this, because I think it will give it a much better polish and probably speed up the process. And like a lot of people I've come across the book. What's the book? Save the Cat, for example, which is giving a lot of good ideas and techniques for plotting. And then a long time ago, I read the book. Have you come across it? Story by Robert McGee, which talks about plotting film scripts. And I think
I haven't.
That's so that's similar in many ways to sort of Save the Cat, which was based on film scripts. And so Story has a bit more of the hero's journey, which I think relates more to my book. So I think I don't want to be too rigid with plotting, but I think it might just give my book an extra kind of polish, and because that could be the 3rd book, and it might turn out to be a trilogy. So I think it will just help me, steer me on that way. But so far, I've been writing, as I say, pantsing it. But when I tend to get writing, it's normally sort of 5-6 days a week, 4 to 5 hours a day on the manuscript. Yeah,
fair enough. So sort of related to that, question number 3 is, are you a full-time author? So obviously you spend a few days plotting a manuscript. Is that because you work full-time on the writing, or is that just sort of 3 days over a longer period of time because you have a job that you have to hold down as well?
I'd like to be a full-time author, but I haven't quite made it there yet. Financially, I couldn't justify it. And so when I left my corporate job, as I say, about 5 years ago, I never went back to working permanently within financial services. I did some consultancy work, and I've been working part-time in that area. So I've been lucky that I've still had connections to that old world and been using them to sort of pay the basic bills. So typically I work 3 days a week on that sort of part-time consultancy basis in the financial world, and then it will be 2 to 3 days a week on the writing. But because I've been researching this book recently. I've just come back from Portugal. It's not like I sort of write in big blocks, then do the marketing, and then come back to the writing. I've probably had about 9 months since the last book came out, and I haven't been writing. I've been doing this research, working, but within the next couple of months, I'll be back down to the writing. Yeah, but yes, no, I'm not in a financial situation to justify that quite yet. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, because we all see in the community some people who are full-time writers and doing very well. But I think what we don't all see is that probably that like Mark, for example, he struggled before he found a formula for his style of writing, and just didn't madly sort of say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to give up my job and I'm going to write a bestseller. I think you have to transition.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wise thing to do. Once you sort of get some momentum behind your writing and you see, you see that building, I think that's probably the time to make the jump. And, and I don't just see myself strictly as an author. I think one of the things I think you learn when you sort of leave that sort of corporate world full time, and going along walk, but we all have several aspects to us, and I kind of see the writing connects into other aspects of myself. And I've given some public speeches relating to going for a long walk across Spain, and how that led to my creative side. So I kind of see myself as there's different sides to me. And I think, again, as indie authors, the one thing that we all learn, that to be a success, you've got to be a business person as well. So I think as a long way of saying that, yes, I'm a part-time writer at the moment still.
Yeah. Okay, well, question number 4 is it's one that we've all got plenty of answers for. It's what mistakes do you think you've made, and what have you got right?
Oh, good question. I think I'll start with the positives.
Yeah.
I think what I've got right is actually being open to sharing my writing with other people for feedback. People who are ahead of me, people who I really value in terms of their sort of grammar skills, and not being sort of introvert about sharing the writing. So as soon as I wrote the first book, I shared it with people I respected, and hopefully got some very good, honest feedback. And with the second book, I did exactly the same, and it meant that, again, that I had to sort of give it the drafts much more extra polishes. But I think the only way we can improve and learn is obviously, one, by doing the craft and writing continuously. But second is being open to sharing your work with people. And getting the feedback and not being too protective about it, as long as it's constructive criticism. So I think that was one thing I felt would really help, was sharing it with people who I knew were readers, and sort of just and different types of people, and who read different types of book, and just getting their reactions, and that's really helps. I think that's one thing I think which has been a positive thing to do. In terms of mistakes, well, I'll tell you something recently that I've done. I think you have to, I'm learning, I think, to begin with, at least, you have to write what you feel, what you really feel passionate about. And as it's probably coming through, I feel passionate about this Reluctant Pilgrim series, about a flamenco guitarist on his journey of self-discovery. However, it's a lot harder story to market. It's not sci-fi, it's not historical fiction, it's not a thriller, it's not fantasy, etc. It probably is sort of within travel fiction, or within literary fiction as a whole. So it has been harder to market, but slowly but surely, I've been building the mailing list up to about 2,000 people now, and I've probably had about 5,000 sales of downloads, and purchase of the paperback. But more recently, I thought, okay, I want to go full time. How do I make some money from this? So I decided to write a thriller,
Right.
a financial thriller, combining my background of stockbroking with my I was always one of these kids who grew up with James Bond, Roger Moore, and I love those sort of those sort of spy thriller stories. And I used to read some of the Frederick Forsyth, Len Dayton, and some of the the well-known thriller writers. And I thought, I can do this, because I love this kind kind of story as well, page turners in that sense. And so I spent some of the summer before I went, I decided to research the next book in the Reluctant Pilgrim series, plotting out very carefully a financial thriller series. And I sequenced it all and I plotted it out very carefully. And then suddenly, just as I finished plotting it out, I suddenly kind of felt, do you know what? I'm not ready to sit down and write this. I'm not really feeling the passion to write this. And I think I've come up with quite a good character and a good series. But I think, the mistake is stick with what you've got a really burning desire to do, and be clear as to why you're writing. Maybe once I've got out of my system this Reluctant Pilgrim series, I might be sort of in a position or willing to write something which is perhaps more commercially, or at least better marketable, viable. So I think really write your own personal story. It's something you feel passionate about. Because I think if you don't, you'll lose momentum and you'll probably burn out.
Yeah. Well, that answers question 5 a little bit. That's which is, what's your final piece of advice for authors starting out in indie publishing? But have you got any other sort of advice for?
I think you're right in a way. Yes, I think or just probably extend that point I touched on, was just be really clear about what you want to get out of being an author. I mean, if you want to write literary fiction, I think, be aware that it's probably going to take a long time to build build a following. You probably need to get quite a few books out, because obviously they won't have a common theme. The theme is your style of writing, but I think so. If you're going to go down that route, I think you just have to accept that you're doing it yourself and be willing to really play the sort of the long game with it. But I think however you say, okay, I want to write because I like writing, but I want to make money from it. Just be really clear as to I'll be honest with yourself. Is that really going to work for me? So I think now there's a lot of sort of I've noticed now a lot of sort of copycat approaches within certain genres, and I think people still like originality. They like original characters, and so you've got to be true to yourself and say, okay, well, if I want to make a commercial living from this, do I really like books? Am I really passionate about sci-fi, or do I just think this seems like a sort of shortcut to making a very good living? And I think so my advice is, just be clear about why you want to write. If you just want to write because you enjoy writing, do it. But just do it as well as you can.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good advice. And that's your 5 questions up. We should probably point out that you're calling in from the London South Bank Centre in case any of the noise doesn't get removed in post-production. It's been generally fine, but just so people know that you don't live in a train station or something anymore.
Yes, well, back to the bank. So it's been sort of pretty good, I think. But yes, there has been the odd person who around here up in the members' room in the South Bank Centre. So God, that went so quick, Tom. Thank you so much for those questions. I hope they all made sense.
Yeah, they were absolutely fantastic, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
Cheers, Tom. Much appreciated.
That's it for this week's Self-Publishing Spotlight. Don't forget that you can get your free self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. And if you want to appear as a guest on this show, send us brief details about yourself and your writing at selfpublishingformula.com/spotlight-guest. I'm Tom Ashford, and I'll see you again next week.